Welcome, everyone, to another awesome episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Today we have, am I going to say super cool, Andrew? Yes, I was going to say it. But today we have another super cool episode because we have a super cool guest. Now,
100%.
we have, hey, you can't say that anymore. I have to edit those out. We said it way too much in season 1. But we actually have Adam, who is a smallmouth master. And I thought since, it's bass season, everyone's thinking about bass fishing. And we don't fish smallmouth as much as we do largemouth. It would be nice to have on Adam because he's so proficient in catching these awesome fish. So how's it going, Adam?
Not too bad. Not too bad. I was, it's funny you say that because at your little event there, this past weekend, fishing for largemouth, I was so out of my depths. I had no idea what was going on. I hit that water and I was like, this is like one large open space, a bunch of weeds. I don't even know what's going on here. Where's the current, right? So,
You were out of your depth because you were in 4 feet of water only.
yeah, that was it too. But yeah, no, I had a blast. So, but it was nice to get back onto the river the next day, back to my comfort zone.
Had to shake off the weeds and, back into the river.
That's right.
And we got to give a shout out though. Despite being out of your element, you managed to catch the biggest fish too. So
yeah, well, that was I think
is
beginner's luck. I think I'm fairly certain. So. And largemouth, I mean, not to dumb it down, but I mean, they give away their location, right? So I mean, there's constantly sunfish like popping all over the place, and then bass blowing up at it. So it's just like, there he is, and I just cast at it. That's what happened with that biggest one. It just blew up out of the water, cast straight at it, caught him. So.
Yeah, and that's why largemouth are fun to catch. They're generally pretty dumb, and you can pretty much guess where they're going to be most of the time. But that's why we're glad that we have you on today, so we can talk a little bit more about smallmouth bass, specifically in river systems, which is a little more complicated than just catching them in the lake, generally speaking. Before we get back into that, we're going to actually have, as tradition states, the interesting fishing fact of the week. And then after that, we'll go in a bit about Adam and some of his publications that he has as well. We can get into that. So before we do that, interesting fishing fact, and we have the man with the mustache, Andrew. Dazzle us.
Well, I was thinking about one of my favorite animals that I've seen only a couple times while fishing. I've only seen them maybe just over a dozen times in my life. And I'm curious to know, in fact, I love this animal so much. I used to have a t-shirt with it, and Jesse gave me the nickname, the Moose Man. And I wore that t-shirt all the time. I love it.
It was Moose Boy back then.
Moose Boy. He's got the beard now, though.
Yeah, just like a moose. So I wanted to talk about some of the cool history involving moose, but not just moose in general. Moose that had a long time relationship with humans. Now, in the early 1900s, there's John Connell. He's from the Miramichi, New Brunswick. We know Miramichi because of striped bass fishing nowadays. But in the early 1900s, it was famous for something else. He was known as the Moose Man. So, I'm just kind of a follow-up runner-up, not as cool. He rescued and domesticated a young moose, and he called it Tommy. Now, he didn't just look after him and he had it like on a farm or whatnot. He actually trained it to behave like a horse. He would even ride this thing into town, used it to pull a sled, and he even made like a saddle for it, which is on display in a museum. Now, Connell wasn't the only guy to ever domesticate a moose like this. In the mid-1800s, Philip Selleck near Moncton, New Brunswick, also experimented with taming moose. He would trap young moose, domesticate them, and use them as draft animals. Now, draft animals are working animals. So horses that are pulling plows or oxen and stuff like that, those are draft animals. Now, because moose are prized for their ability to navigate deep snow, we know that if you look at them in a bog and you try and follow it, I guarantee you are not going to be able to walk where that moose can walk. Even though you weigh a fraction of what it weighs, its ability to walk through unstable terrain is incredible. Their endurance is off the charts. They can walk or travel up to 50 miles a day without tiring. and that's under load while they were being used as draft animals. So they were better than horses for certain tasks. They're not as fast as a horse, but you talk about pulling power and ability to navigate the terrain, they were superior to horses at that time. Now, again, that's not the only guy who's done it. I was shocked and surprised in doing research for this as to how many times people over the years have domesticated moose. And I don't know about you guys, but that's always been a dream of mine, is to ride a moose or have a pet moose. They're so cool.
Things we didn't know about Andrew.
I mean, I'm
That
not
and
shocked.
the bison. Another side note, the movie, I think it's called Buffalo Rider, is a pretty good movie. It's insane the shots they got. But again, things that they say you can't tame, these guys did somehow. So Albert Vaillancourt from Chelmsford, Ontario, he went on tour around Eastern Canada and the US with his team, so there were two of them side by side, of racing moose. He would challenge horse teams to races, and he would oftentimes win. Because moose, they have surprising speed, and more importantly, incredible stamina. Now, some of their abilities, moose, they are the largest members of the deer family. Adult males, the bull moose, they can be up to 6.5 feet at the shoulder. So not at the head, not at the antlers, at the shoulder. They're 6.5 feet. And they can weigh between 800 to 2,000 pounds. The
Chunky.
females, they're slightly smaller, but they're still massive animals. Now, they can run up to 35 miles per hour. That's insane. So think of something that's like a ton, a metric ton, running through the woods at 35 miles per hour. They're also excellent swimmers. They can cross large bodies of water and diving up to 20 feet to feed on aquatic plants, which my wife would kill me if I don't say this fact. Unfortunately, that makes moose one of the prime prey animals to orca whales because they will dive down in the ocean. The antlers themselves, they're very notable. If anyone thinks of a moose, you're thinking of those massive, like spoon-like antlers. Just the most beautiful thing you're going to see in a silhouette form in Canada. Now, they can, just the antlers themselves, they can be up to 6 feet across and weigh as much as 40 pounds. The cool thing about antlers is, unlike horns, they're shed annually. So that means every year, these moose are growing these things, again, maybe up to 40 pounds, into 6 feet across. So during peak growing period, their antlers will grow up to an inch every single day.
Wow.
Imagine if like your fingernails grew that fast.
You're like, I mean, yours
like, oh,
don't?
it's time for the 9 o'clock fingernail trimming. But it's crazy that domesticated moose, it never became widespread. It's a lot harder because if a horse escapes or something like that, they'd usually have, they're in general easier to tame and easier to manage. If a moose escapes, it reverts to being back to wild, apparently. And so you got to start the whole process over again. So it's a lot of upkeep to keep a moose domesticated, whereas a horse will generally hold on to that domestication a lot longer. But just remember, the next time you see a moose, you heard it here, Average Ontario Anglers, you can ride it. Just kidding, don't try and ride it.
As the producer and owner of Average Ontario Anglers, I strongly, say that you shouldn't do that. But if you have to sue someone, sue Andrew.
So my son, so he actually has a house up in French River that backs onto prime moose territory, and so he's actually encountered quite a few moose. And we go back there. There's lots of moose sign. They're shredding bark off the off the saplings, and it's like 7-8 feet in the air that they're pulling this stuff off.
When you think of a buck rub, when you see a buck rub from a deer, and yeah, they're usually 2 to 3 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
And then a moose come up and it's above your head.
Yeah. Pretty wild. I will not be riding a moose anytime soon.
Party pooper. Kidding.
I thought that was going to be your next book.
First.
How to catch smallmouth from the back of a moose.
I'll have to use some kind of like AI program to make artwork for this YouTube video. Just like Andrew on the back of a moose, catching a smallmouth bass, reading a book.
Nice.
Let's do it. So anyway, thanks for that random fishing fact, Andrew. I love when fishing facts have nothing to do with fishing. Just kidding. Our interesting fishing fact is more just, we should really call it the interesting fact of the episode, because we oftentimes talk about lots of random things. Like last week, we talked about mosquitoes, which was, I thought was pretty good. So now we talk about things that mosquitoes bite, which are moose. So I thought we could just have a little bit of an intro with Adam here. If Adam, you want to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself and things that you've done for the fishing community here.
Yeah, so Adam Merrifield, obviously. I've been fishing most of my life. Kind of kicked off as a small child, growing up with a creek in my backyard. That really sort of took a back seat. I'd say sort of in my early adulthood, as it's a fairly common story I'm hearing, but as kids came along, fishing became, kind of a once a year kind of thing. And it wasn't until my kids got a little bit older and sort of more self-reliant that I really wanted to kind of explore getting back into fishing, but really sort of mastering, the aspect that, really appealed to me, and that was sort of getting back to those smaller bodies of water after, spending a number of years kind of fishing lakes and reservoirs, surprisingly for largemouth bass. Sort of getting back into rivers, really trying to learn and explore that, to the greatest extent, to maybe understand better what I maybe didn't understand as a child. That's sort of what drove me, and really, as I sort of progressed down that path, I came to realize that I was maybe unlocking something that others were maybe not as familiar with, and that's sort of where that educational component came in, and content creation around sort of what I was doing, and that eventually kind of led into the publication of a book. But I sort of went sort of beyond that. Yeah, there you go, book. Let's all raise one.
Andrew took my copy.
This has a beautiful to Jesse note on the inside cover.
Wait, I'll get yours in the mail. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
It's all good.
I've been able to read his copies. That's fantastic.
Me and Andrew share books, but then they usually end up on his bookshelf because he has a collection. So I'm just like,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, and really, it's so I mean, the book. I was already on social media kind of prior to that, but the book just kind of opened up that envelope a little bit wider. Sort of led to other opportunities like bait creation, and then really just kind of working with a lot of the local bait makers as well. The community that you guys have been really promoting through your social media and through this podcast. I mean, they're all the same folks that I've been able to engage as well. A lot of them I've actually learned through through your podcast, and and it's been a great opportunity to sort of expand my influence that way.
Definitely. And even at CanCast, I think that's the first time we met you, Adam, was at CanCast.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. It was great to see not just a few people, but a lot of people walking with your book in their hand.
Yeah.
Which is great to see, because like we got the book last year, we read it. It's a fantastic book, has great pictures in it. It's a super good book. And then we were at CanCast, we saw tons of people walking around buying it. We heard tons of people on social media. We at the fishing meetup last week, I recall several people being like, "Hey, I have your book. I bought your book. It's great." So again, if you guys are listening to this and you don't have this book, definitely check it out. We'll put all the links below. Support Adam. It's a great book. It's a great read. You will learn something from this book. I know we talked about it last year. We gave away a few copies, and the winners too, they messaged us and they were like, "We love the book." So it's fantastic. Is there a second book coming in the future, maybe? Wink, wink.
There is. I'm well into it. It's going to be a different take. I actually have a couple of books in mind, but I think where I'm headed with this one is really my personal quest for that sort of 23-incher. I'm getting close, haven't quite got there. So it's going to be more about um, my own sort of personal thought process and the stories behind the bigger and bigger and bigger fish that I'm catching. So that's actually one of the prime reasons why you've seen the change in content on Instagram this year, is specifically because the first book was written mostly from memory. The second book, I'm actually trying to capture all the content to actually help me figure out kind of what went into that catch that day. So I'd like to take it from that perspective, a little bit more personal, a little bit more storytelling.
Yeah.
But I've actually reached out to quite a few folks. Some of the big heavy hitters, some of the big sticks, the river sticks out there,
You don't
to
need
see
to
if
butter us up
they.
there.
Yeah, that's right. So I've reached out to some of the big river names out there to see if they'd be interested in actually doing some interviews and sharing their stories as well, and really just kind of putting together a montage of what it took to get the biggest fish in your sort of arsenal. So really I'm writing the book that I wanted to write the first time around, but due to self-publishing constraints, like that's as thick as the book is, right? I'd like to go considerably thicker than that. More pages, more story, more details. But yeah, it's well underway. We're getting there. No promises that it's going to be, this spring or the spring after, but I'm going to spend a bit of time to, focus on the book that I want to make for myself.
Awesome. And one thing I appreciate about your book, and we hear this a lot about like our podcast, people be like, I love your podcast because it's information that is relevant to this area, like Ontario. Now, your book is relevant to not just Ontario. I'd say you could, take that into the States as well and other places in river systems for smallmouth. But it's always good to pick up a book and be like, this guy lives here. He lives where I live, and he's fishing for fish that I want to catch. That to me, it's more relatable. And, the bait choices and everything. Like we always look at like magazines, like, oh, bass fishing magazines. And it's guys fishing down in Florida. And you're like, that's cool, but that has nothing to do with the way that we're going to fish up here. So it is good to have that relatable content. So
and
we
even
can
I
expand
get
to that.
even having
I
something
get
that's a bit
that
more
quite a
modern
bit.
too, because I know like I have a lot of like old vintage books, but even the Scientific Angler, stuff like that. I grew up reading those. I still have them on my shelf. But when you're talking about bass fishing and they're like, oh, use a long rod, like a 5-6 pistol grip, like all these different things that they're so outdated. And to have something that is based off of with fishing pressured waters these days, not something that was pristine 60 years ago, using techniques and stuff and information that is relevant not only to area, but really to timing.
Yeah. Well, and at the same time too, like there are classic techniques that I cover, classic baits that I cover. It's none of it is trendy. I mean, I'll follow the odd trend here and there, but I mean, for the most part, your basic kit that you can get at, Canadian Tire, Walmart, I mean, that's usually good enough, right? So, and that, this first book was based on that premise that I need this to be accessible, to the 3 kids that I saw, wading through the river, just on Saturday, who were honestly out fishing me, because they're chucking MEP spinners, right? So, that's the point. The point is this book needed to be accessible, to anybody of any financial means, and really just bring the joy back into fishing, and not emphasizing that you need electronics and a boat and the latest Sims waders and You know what I mean? Like it just had to be, down to the basics. And honestly, the fishing pole that you got sitting in your closet is probably good enough. The ugly stick that that Jesse sold you at sale is probably good enough. And then throw in a 1/4 ounce jig head and a grub, and you're going to catch smallmouth bass.
Definitely. So before we get too into some of those like techniques and lures and stuff, I thought we could kind of talk about you're talking about in their second book that you're writing. You're kind of talking about the personal accomplishment of catching that big one. So I'm sure a lot of us that go fishing, bass fishing, muskie fishing, whatever, that's what drives us, is to learn the fish better, learn their behavior, learn where they are, learn how they react to different things, so that we can consistently catch fish, but also consistently catch larger fish. That's everyone's goal, is to catch, that whopper, right? That big fish that you can brag to everyone about, or beat your family record or whatever, maybe beat the Ontario record, who knows, right? So I thought we could go into a little bit about smallmouth bass fishing. And first of all, your thoughts on understanding smallmouth bass behavior in rivers. So like we talked, it's a little different than, well, it's a lot different than catching largemouth in the lily pads. It's completely different. So thought we could kind of discuss that. And since this podcast is going to be coming out in August, but I thought we could kind of focus maybe from August on, like August, September, until you stop fishing, probably October-ish. I'm not sure when you stop in the fall.
Give me all the tips I need, because I'm going to my cottage river in like 2 weeks. So from the state of recording. So please I'm writing stuff down. I want to get some facts straight from the source, even more the source than your book.
So this is the perfect time then. If it's coming out sort of near the end of August, that's when the fishing is going to absolutely light up. So kind of right now, in the phase we're in right now, you got to worry about sort of time of day, sun position and whatnot. But as you sort of get to the tail end of August, that's when they're starting to feel that need to kind of, feed up for the fall, right? So the days are getting shorter. Probably some of the evenings are getting a little bit cooler by this point as well. So, one of those telltale signs is if you get up early in the morning, you'll start to see a lot of the mist, right? The river valley is kind of shrouded in a mist. So I find that is the perfect opportunity to not only speed up your presentation, but actually go for bigger presentations. And you're going to find that you're going to get the bigger bites, right? So top water plays a part in my fishing every day, just because I love it. And I'll actually throw topwater. I'll try and force a topwater bite right into November. Sometimes I'm successful, but especially late August, probably till mid-September, topwater is going to be on fire. Any sort of like fluke type of presentation, where you're sort of using like a soft jerk bait, that's going to be lit up, sort of pushing into the backs of pockets or pushing up onto the banks. If you see a lot of like bait fish activity on the bank, follow them there. Throw in a fluke, throw in a topwater, any kind of moving presentation. Spinner baits, like with the bigger blades, at that time of year is going to start to produce for you. And then of course your standard presentations, like moving along the bottom with a jig, is great, but if you don't have to spend the time kind of working the bottom, don't bother. So like I find middle to top of the water column at the end of August is just key, and it's a fun way to fish, right? So you can start throwing chatterbaits. I know you guys love chatterbaits quite a bit. Spinner baits, underspins, but bigger profile underspins, and of course swim jigs. Pretty much anything that's going to move, and don't be afraid to move it fast. As long as the nights are starting to cool down, and sort of at least in the morning and in the evening has the water feeling a little bit cooler, you're going to be able to move as fast as you want. And I mean, don't worry about, even right now, like I'm moving baits, like I'm just trying to reel it in because I didn't like the cast and I want to throw. So I'm burning that bait in, and I'm having fish just chase that fast enough that it scared me, right? So, don't be afraid to move move the bait fast, right? If you're looking for the biggest of the big bites, then those slower jig bites at the bottom, are still going to play. Because I'll throw a jig bite, when I hit a pocket and I know that the big fish are there. Still it's going to be a jig that kind of dials that in for me. Once you get past mid-August and start pushing into sort of mid to late September, that's when those erratic presentations are going to start to play in a little bit more. You're going to want to slow it down. That's where, jerk baits with a longer pause, depending on how cool things are getting. Like, sometimes you get that cold snap that, just really shuts things down quickly. But those erratic presentations, something that's going to flutter and fall, as you start noticing bait fish dying off, then it's time for you to start, making your presentation, do the same thing. So, and then as you get sort of more into October, again, it's just as the temperature progresses, start to slow it down. So as the temperature drops, slow it down even more. And then once you get past, mid-October into November, then it's kind of, it's a bit of a crapshoot in that sense. Really slow presentations, but then sometimes based on weather patterns, you may find you can speed it up for a day or two as well.
Yeah, it's similar. Like we've been getting into muskie the last few years. It's similar with a lot of species like muskie. Like late August again. That's that first few days when you get those cold mornings and the fish are just like start feeding like crazy into September, and then after October everything starts getting colder, and then you still catch fish, but you got to go slow. So those are good tips for sure. Speaking of rivers, so if you're someone listening and you've never fished a river for bass, explain kind of in easy terms the difference between river fishing and lake fishing for smallmouth bass.
Yeah. So lake fishing, you're generally going to get a more pelagic type of fish. So, a group of fish that are going to sort of travel the water system following bait around. The difference in a river is the bait comes to them eventually, right? So it's like it's like the conveyor belt at the grocery store. I mean, the food just keeps passing by the scanner, right? So it's the same basic concept. So you'll find fish in the river that will hold in the same pool year after year, generation after generation. There's lots of studies that indicate that they will migrate. That can be true, but I mean, if that pool that you've found them in is holding them, and it's fulfills all their basic needs from spawning to food to winter and or cold weather protection, then that group will stay put. The key though is actually finding the parts of the river that will do that will meet all those needs, and that will sort of hold those fish there for that period of time. And that's sort of, I think, kind of the bigger challenge. So trying to break down a river system, because I get lots of questions of like, without giving me your spots, can you tell me where to go and where to fish? And I always lead by, go get the GoPaddling app, iOS or Android. Get the GoPaddling app. Pretty much anywhere that they've listed as a canoe kayak access is a great place for you to start, as far as access to the river. But then from there, it's a matter of understanding the river features to understand where fish are going to want to hold up. And without spilling all the beans, look for the bends in the river. the bends in the river is a good place to start, because usually leading up to the bend is a riffle, and then closing out the bend is a glide, right? And everywhere in between is the riffle, the run, the pool, and the glide, right? And that's sort of key. If you can understand that about rivers and understand which portions of those, or which select combination of those is likely to hold smallmouth bass, then you've unlocked all the secrets there is to know about river smallmouth fishing. Except
Nice.
I'm still learning. So
if someone says they know everything about something, they're lying. You
Yeah.
can
Don't
always
believe him.
learn. Yeah. It
Yeah.
is interesting because I grew up trout fishing, float fishing, centerpin fishing for steelhead. And every time I would fish with someone who doesn't fish in current, it just blew my mind because I grew up doing that, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't understand, where to cast or where fish would hide behind rocks or behind bends or like undercut banks, stuff like that. So it depends on what you do, right? So if you're someone that fishes lakes a lot for bass, fishing a river could be very confusing to someone just getting into it, which is another reason why you should get Adam's book, because it explains all the spots to cast.
Yeah.
You got to somehow invent some kind of waterproof book so you can just like have it in the boat as you're fishing. It's like,
I take
wait
it
a
with
second,
me.
turn to page 42.
Yep. No, I literally take it with me. It's the size of a 3600 Plano series box, so I know it fits in most tackle bags and boxes, and I take a copy with me. So I start out the season with a copy, and then it stays in my tackle bag. And then last year I gave it away at the end of the year. Had all my notes in it. I plan to do the same thing this year, except I just gave away the copy to to a young guy that I saw fish in the river. His mom brought him to the river, and she was asking me questions about where to go, and so I just gave him the copy that I had with me. So
He's like, thanks for the soggy book. You're like, I dropped it a
yeah,
few times. I'm sorry.
don't smell it and wash
There's like
your
a
hands
dew worm
afterwards.
between the pages.
Yeah.
That's a great point about the GoPaddling app, because that is an app that I started using maybe 2 years ago. It's a fantastic app. I found a lot of not only great fishing spots, but also access points that
Yeah.
it would have took me a long time to find myself. One word of wisdom, though, if you're using that app, is make sure you double check. Some of the access points aren't legit. So
Yeah.
find the spots, but also double check, because sometimes they're just randomly on people's property or something. But it is a great app, and there's so many good spots in Ontario to fish. You literally zoom out in Ontario, it's just like millions of dots on that map of spots that you can possibly fish. That's why I hate when people are like, oh, give me a fishing spot. It's like, dude, they're so easy to find. Like, just download this app, or just look at a river that you want to fish near your house, download this app and zoom in, and I guarantee there's probably going to be multiple access points on it if it's a decent sized river. So it's that's the first part, is finding somewhere to fish. And like Adam said, there are a few spots you're gonna have to look for on the river, right?
Yeah, and so the GoPaddling app, I will say that's where you start. That's where you get on the river. I wouldn't suggest, for the most part, that people fish exactly there where the app brought them. It takes, you've got to travel upstream, downstream, whichever direction you want to go. But get away from the bridges, right? Get away from, the spots where, if you see a well-worn path there, and a bunch of worm buckets, worm styrofoam on this side of the river, chances are those fish aren't interested in kind of looking at what you have to present, right? So move away from the bridge, move away from those access points that the GoPaddling app brought you to. Move on to the next riffle, the next run, the next glide, the next pool, and start exploring there, and just kind of keep moving that way. Break the river down in that way. And it's funny. So when I talk about the riffle, for instance, if you're wading, if you're somebody who wades, we're all, I firmly believe we're all intuitive enough to know that, where do you cross the river? Well, you cross the river at the shallowest point, right? we know where that happens to be just instinctively. Well, deer know that, raccoon know that, coyotes know that. Every game trail that you ever encounter on a river happens to be at a riffle, right? Look for the game trails, right? Um, Cross at the riffle, walk on the inside of the bank. These are all things that, as a natural animal, we tend to understand the mechanics of rivers, right? It's a matter of getting off of the bank and into the water. That's what actually kind of unlocks that and opens that up for us. So that's one word of advice I can say. If you're going to go looking, don't go looking to just stand on the bank. Get a pair of old tennis shoes or Sims waders, whatever you have available to you. Get yourself in the water, start walking the length of it, practice water safety, but get in the water and explore. That's what's going to make all the difference.
Yeah, because even fishing anywhere where we fish, even in the lakes, you generally do better when you get away from people. When you get away from the spot that, you maybe right near the boat launch, there's a big log in the water. You're like, oh, that looks good. Every single angler coming past that log has probably cast at that 5 or 6 times, 25 times in the morning, 25 times in the afternoon, 25 times in the evening, every single day. So
yeah,
it's definitely worth it. Now, I noticed you're talking about wading. I know some of the rivers that you fish they're not tiny. They're a little bit bigger. Is this something that you can fish from some kind of a watercraft?
So regardless of the size of the river, I actually do spend a lot of time in a watercraft, kayak, canoe, any small sort of personal craft. But I don't want to give the illusion that I never leave that watercraft. I usually just use that as kind of the means to get to where I want to go quickly. And then I hop out and I sort of wade around the area. But for most of the water that I fish, I'll fish from my canoe. But I do have to get out quite regularly to line my canoe over the riffles to, any sort of portaging that I need to do. Sorry,
I
go
did
ahead.
notice your canoe when I saw it the other day. It was well used.
Oh yeah.
So
Some big patches on that thing.
Yeah. So it's funny. It's actually just 9 months younger than I am. So the date stamped on it is December 13th, 1974. So it is just about 50 years old. So it'll be 50 years old soon. So
the stories that boat could tell.
Yeah. So, but
That's
it's great.
awesome.
I mean, I picked that boat up. I think I might have paid like $300 for it. And it had some, cracks, some galvanic corrosion, and so I got some aluminum patched up with some blind rivets and 3M 4200 and whatnot. And it's as dry as it needs to be. I'm getting in and out of it all the time, so I'm probably pulling in more water than it would let in, in a 2-hour time period anyway. So
yeah, you don't need something fancy, when you're just, especially I find for us, like with the Sports Pal, we do lots of crap in that boat, and I got it brand new, and the first few times that we slid it down a beaver dam or rolled it down a hill, I was like, oh, now I'm just like, who cares? Throw it down the hill. It rolls down, lands in the water. It's like, yeah. And then we jump in. It has so many dents and scratches on the bottom. Big, it's scary, but.
And, my boat should be a testament to the, 50 years, as long as you're willing to put the work into it to patch it up, provided it's not like crushed, it's worth keeping it going. So.
Yeah. So again, you can spend a few $100 on a small canoe, a kayak, something like that, get it used, and it'll get you on the water and help you catch more fish.
Yeah.
So you don't need anything fancy. We always say that on Instagram and stuff. You don't need a big boat to catch big fish or to catch any fish. And then I had one guy actually comment, you don't need a boat at all to catch fish. And I was like, that is true, but I like to get away from weirdos. And then he said, fair point. So having a boat, it's a tool, right? Like you said, you want to get down the river quick. You may have to pull it over, riffles and stuff that are shallow. Like we have to do that sometimes too. And you get out and you drag it down, or on the way back, you might have to drag it up some rapids that you can't go down or up because you're too weak to paddle fast enough. That's what I have to do anyway. But yeah, it's good. And it's good to have a beater so you don't have to worry about it and be like, oh, my fiberglass $3,000 canoe. It's like, I don't care. Another dent won't kill it.
Well, and that's the thing, like from my paddles to the boat, like I know what I'm putting it through on my local rivers. And so, I mean, I invest not in the lightest gear or I invest in the gear that,
durable.
I want to treat it like somewhat disposable. Like I've got a, Canadian Tire, one of those anniversary paddles, right? And, it turned out to actually be a great paddle. I just bought it as a beater, but then this year I actually fiberglassed it over. I put a rock art on it and the whole bit, and weighs a ton. And I just added some cordage on the shaft because it was getting all worn out. But it's like, again, it's not why I'm out there. I'm not out there to impress folks with my shiny canoe and gorgeous paddle, right?
See my bending branches paddle? No one cares.
Yeah, that reminds me.
I just offended 4 kayak anglers right there.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a little story that Jesse and I, we were fishing a back lake, or actually in a provincial park where there's no motors allowed, and we're paddling my canoe, and my canoe gets stored outside, right? So we're paddling my canoe, and this guy looks over, he's like, "That's a nice canoe. You should wash it." It's covered in slime. And just to continue the story, Jesse and I look at this guy. He's got like a white tank top that's got like holes and like random stains. Is like yeah, it's a crap body. You should try doing something with that. Like
yeah. That being said, though, Andrew has a beautiful Swift Algonquin canoe,
Nice.
and it just happened to have some rotted leaf marks on the bottom because it was the first day of the year we got it out, so it looked pretty dirty. But the guy was like, "Nice canoe, you need to wash it." Meanwhile, he looked like a crazy hillbilly that rolled out of a ditch. So we were just chuckling to ourselves. But anyway, before we get onto the gear part, again, Adam's book goes into much detail on exactly. It's almost like not fair, because if you buy the book, it's almost like this is exactly what to do. Like you could literally buy it, have no idea, never fished freshwater fishing at all, pick up a rod and reel, and you could go out and read this book and get enough out of it to catch fish. But for the listeners today, let's just talk about your favorite spot on a river to catch fish. And then we'll kind of get into gear. Because again, you said at the beginning of the podcast, Adam was like, I was looking at the outline and this is a lot to cover in an hour. And I'm like, yeah, we're not going to cover it. It would be like a 4-hour long podcast. Be like, let's discuss every spot in the river that could possibly have a smallmouth bass in it. Per season. So why don't you just give us your favorite spot, and then we'll kind of go into gear after that.
One of the things that I look for, and is one of the reasons why I actually try new sections of the river as often as I can. But one key feature I really focus on is plunge pools. So if you don't know the riverine structure to begin with, I can cover that, riffles, run, pool, glide. I mean, that's the sequence. A plunge pool in particular is a pool that you would find immediately after a riffle. So you've got a fairly aggressive riffle and water flow going, and all of a sudden, skipping the whole glide process, it drops into like, a 4-foot plus hole. I absolutely love when I can find those, because I find, early summer, late summer, early fall, they will be stacked up in there because it's highly oxygenated water, and the food just literally passes overhead. So I find is if anytime I can drop, a jig in particular into those pools, it's just a frenzy. It's like, 18, 19, 20-inch smallmouth, and it almost seems like a limitless supply. plunge pools are difficult to find because you need to have the exact bottom composition to actually make that happen. And some plunge pools may only be big enough to, hold one smallmouth, right? But if you can find that mecca where, the plunge pool is, 4+ feet deep and happens to be, 10 or more feet wide and, 10, 20 feet in length, then I find that is just, I love that. That's, so I'm constantly on the search for something like that. But when I don't have that, certainly I'd say in the summer months, the most fun I think I find is when you find them in the run, and that's that water that sort of just gets 2 to 4 feet deep after a riffle. I find that is fun, especially in the summer, because I can throw chatterbaits, crankbaits. I can throw anything fast and moving, and as long as I'm downstream and I'm pulling back towards me downstream, it's just lights out. It's just smash, smash, right? So I love those two features in particular. When it gets later into the season, that's when the pool plays a sort of bigger part, because that's when they're going to just kind of be getting ready for winter, so they're going to be kind of settling in the deeper water that doesn't change temperature as much. But and then of course, like river flow is sort of impacts kind of where the fish move. And that's sort of an important point. Like, a lot of people fall into the trap, and this isn't just of river fishing, this is just fishing in general. I caught a fish here, therefore I will catch a fish here every time I go there, and I'm going to go there to catch a fish. And, it's just simply not the case. Like, fish of all species, they'll move. They'll move based on, forage and weather conditions, and so smallmouth bass in the river are no different. So, you do have to constantly look for them, again, with the exception of a plunge pool. I think a plunge pool at a certain time of year when the water temperature is just right, I'm always going to find them in a plunge pool.
Nice. See, you hear that, people? Adam just told you the hot spot.
I know.
To catch fish.
It's literally, I spend my days chasing plunge pools, and now people know the secret.
Yeah, don't worry, I'll blur that out. It'll be like, my favorite spot is a beep.
That's right. It'd be on the witness protection program. Voice disguised.
So I know you covered a bit about, we're talking about you don't need the most fancy gear. So irregardless of whoever's budget, because I always say to people like, oh, this $100 rod, that may be expensive to you. That may be extremely cheap to you. Price aside, we always say to people, it doesn't matter. Just buy the best gear you can afford. The actual price of the gear itself doesn't matter as much to the fish. They don't know what you're holding in your hands generally. I've never met a fish that was like, hey, is that a Loomis? Yeah, man, thanks. Spent my whole paycheck on it. So why don't we cover some of just the basic tackle, like the rods that you personally bring down on the river. If you were going to bring, the first scenario, just one rod, and then the second scenario would be whatever you normally bring, maybe a few rods.
Yeah. So if I am going to wade and I bring just one rod, I'm a bait caster guy. So for me,
Nice.
It's a casting rod. It's medium with a moderate action, and that's. That's kind of like, for a lot of people, that'd be like using an ugly stick, right? Maybe a little bit more sensitive than that. I do that so that I can cover a wide range of presentations, right? So if I got one rod, I want to be able to cover, I want to be able to use a jerk bait, or a walking bait, and be able to get the appropriate action with it. So I like a little bit, lighter and kind of whippier. If I'm going to go with more than one rod, it's a medium heavy, right? So medium heavy, fast, extra fast action, and that kind of covers those two rods there. And I'll be honest, apart from the odd spinning rod that might be medium, with a light action, that's all I have. My setup, up in French River, my setup down here, it's the same. It's a casting rod and a medium heavy, and one will do larger, spinner baits, chatter baits, jig, all my sort of heavier, maybe half ounce presentations, and then the casting rod will cover my more finessey applications. I'll even try and throw Senko the odd time on a medium, moderate power. So, but that's not, I wouldn't recommend that for everybody. That's just kind of what I've, kind of learned to tolerate. Would I like other, setups? I absolutely would. I would enjoy using, but for me, it's all about pragmatism and practicality. And I also make a little bit of a game out of, maintaining the cheapest possible setup at all times and using that gear forever. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed, but I have some content where I'm using this old Shimano. Actually, it's right here. It's a Shimano
KS?
Casitas.
Casitas. That
Yeah.
is old. Wow.
Yeah, it's old. I don't know if I can put the sound on it, but I finally took it off because I couldn't stand it anymore. But it grinds and it squeaks and it's like,
Sounds like one of
and
my reels right now.
yeah, and it's for me it's like, again, like you say, I mean, the fish don't care, right? So, but I've got, you probably see from some of my content, I've got a fairly entry model Abu Garcia, Veritas rod, and it's actually fairly old. I've replaced probably most of the guides on it. I've got an old Fenwick that's probably got half the guides replaced on it. So, and it's not because I couldn't go out and get myself some better, more modern or lighter gear. It's because it's like, how long can I make this stuff last for? And I definitely hit the limit on the old Shimano, but yeah, I mean, I don't, I do not buy the high end gear, not because I'm opposed to it. It's just, for me, I don't know. It's a mental game. It's like, can I catch the biggest fish on the crappiest, not the crappiest, but the most sort of tried and true, like Black Max 3 reel.
Yeah.
Like, how many fish I've caught on that Black Max 3, and you can tell any parent to go out and buy their kid a Black Max 3 and they're not going to bat an eyelash, right? So,
Sounds like me with
but what would
vintage
I?
baits. I like using the oldest baits I could possibly can find.
Yeah, right. You know what? Actually, I should have brought this for you guys. I know the listeners can't see this, but it's an old, what's that, Devil's Red Horse or something like that?
The crazy, or yeah, Smithwick's Devil's Horse.
Yes, that's messed that all up. Yeah, I've got that. I've got a bunch of other stuff. I don't use it, but I should give that to you guys.
So yeah,
But
no,
I mean,
for
what
sure.
would I recommend that people get? I mean, we're here in Canada, like, spinning rod and reel is king. I mean, I'd recommend somebody, get a medium to medium heavy, extra fast action, spinning reel, and that's going to let you cast the smallest, baits, the biggest baits, and, you're probably good. But it's not about, brand names, get yourself a ugly stick,
Get whatever you can, whatever you want, right? Like,
Yeah.
I like the point you said, like, it may not be the best to chuck a stick bait on a crankbait rod, but you can do it. Like, it's just whatever, you can tolerate on that. Like, I'm sure we've all done that where we're fishing and we only have one rod with us and we're like, oh man, I want to chuck a jig, and all you have is a crankbait rod. You're like, well, let's see what happens. And guess what?
Yeah.
You still catch a fish. Is it the best for that? No. Does it work? Absolutely. So you don't have to worry as much about the gear. It's more about the presentation than anything, right?
Yeah, the presentation and the cadence is key, right? I mean, that's what I've learned over the years, right? I find people struggle when they don't have the cadence down right. And I'm actually the same. Like I've mastered the smallmouth cadence to a point where I actually find it very difficult to catch any other fish. I've spent years mastering an anti-pike cadence so that I didn't have pike biting me off anymore, to the point where I actually find it very difficult to catch pike now.
That may not be a bad thing, honestly.
Oh,
That's
Most of the
interesting
time.
because growing up, my dad and I, like, we would fish again cottage fish Algonquin Park, and we would fish, and all we ever caught was rock bass and smallmouth. That's it. That's all we ever caught. Maybe a
Yeah.
random walleye. We never caught pike, and for years we didn't think there were even pike in these waters. And then as soon as you get old enough, Jesse and I were, we're trolling spinner baits. We're just catching nothing but pike. Like the water's filled with them, but I don't know what changed, but all of a sudden I went from fishing the same water and we caught a bunch of pike. But for years growing up, we didn't even know they existed in that river.
Yeah, it's all about the cadence, and I spent years observing exactly what would turn a pike away, because up in French River, the water's clear enough, and especially if you're using like topwater presentation, you can actually watch. I mean, it's kind of like when you raise a muskie, right? So like I would watch exactly how long of a pause would make them turn back around, and how short of a pause would bring them back again, right? So I mean, I mastered the cadence just so I wouldn't get my lures bitten off. I don't expect everybody to sort of get that scientific about it, but yeah, I really struggle. Apart from just moving spoons really fast in a consistent speed, I actually struggle to catch decent sized pike. I can always catch hammer handles, but so I've turned myself into a one-trick pony. So.
That's okay. I'll wait for the mighty pike book to come out. You open it up, it's just empty. Like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Just write your smallmouth
Exactly.
notes in. That's your
Yeah,
notebook.
yeah.
It's the pike book.
Yeah.
It's just empty pages.
Well, yeah, I mean, somebody joked after this weekend. Somebody joked about, oh, do I smell another book coming on, like Catching Mighty Largemouth? And I'm like, it'd be a really short book, like one page, cast at weeds, the end.
That's generally, I'd say, like 80% of it for me, anyway. I thought before we end, so we do have a few question and answers or questions that we got from people on Instagram. But before we do that, I thought we could just briefly go over conservation and ethics.
Yeah.
I know you're really big into that.
Yeah.
If you could discuss, I know bass aren't generally something that a lot of people eat. Some people do. We have nothing against that at all. That is your right if you have a fishing license. But why don't you tell us briefly the importance in your mind of catch and release fishing, especially for trophy smallmouth bass, and maybe the fish handling side of it as well.
Yeah, and it's especially like in river systems, it can be fairly sensitive because the carrying capacity of a river or any given section of river is not, that's not equal to what you'd expect in like Lake Simcoe, for instance, right? So I find it's particularly sensitive in a river because the areas which smallmouth bass can hold in, and make a living out of is fairly small. And what you end up finding is that they're going to be, fairly tightly packed in there. So once people discover this and they keep going to the same hole over and over and over again, you're going to start to decimate that overall population. And that's where I discuss in the book, like I, just briefly discuss. I mean, it's your right to, if you're following the regulations, it's your right to keep bass and eat them. That's fine. Right. But there's this misconception that means, oh, I've got a limit, if it's a conservation license, I've got a limit of 2, right? Given your zone, right? But I mean, generally across Ontario, that's a fairly common limit. They think that, okay, I have a limit of 2, I can catch 2, go home, put them in my freezer, and then I'm going to go out the next day and I'm going to catch 2 more. It's a complete misunderstanding of the regulations. You can catch 2 a day and possess 2 a day, but possess includes what's in your freezer. It's your overall possession, right? So If you want to catch 2 a day, you can eat 2 a day. But then, that's the only way. It's by eating those 2. That's the only. But, people just generally don't understand that. So, be mindful of the carrying capacity of your river if you intend to keep fish, right? The other aspect of it too is like you said, is fish handling. And I actually just listened to one of your episodes the other day where you actually went into length about fish grippers and all that kind of stuff. That's actually, sage advice on all of that, right? So if you're going to, measure, take a picture, all that kind of stuff that we tend to do on social media, um, you know, same applies to, musky fishing, pike fishing. Once you've caught that fish, give it some time to recover. So for me personally, I've got a net. So once I've caught them, I'll hold them in the net in the water. But I like your idea about the grippers on a lanyard. It's not something I'd considered. I have those grippers, so it's something I'm going to practice now. But let that fish recover. Let it relax a bit in the water and keep that fish in the water as much as you possibly can. I'll pull the fish out, I'll measure it, I'll put the fish back in the water. Pull the fish out, take a picture or a video, whatever content I'm creating at the time, I'll put it back in the water. Get ready to release it. It's a process, but for me, the fewer moments that I have that fish out of the water, the better. And I think I think that does a world of difference to maintaining these populations. And I've caught, it's hard to tell with smallmouth because they can change their spots so readily. But I've caught, based on other markings that I can identify, I've caught some of the same fish by going back to, a hole the next year, year after year. So I know there's one fish in particular, I've gone back 3 years in a row and I've caught that same fish. It's got some very distinguishable markings. So, catch and release works for bass in particular. I know for lots of species it may not, and the school is out on that, but for smallmouth bass in the rivers, catch and release absolutely works.
Definitely. Yeah. Good tips for sure. Like you said, it's a great resource. It could be damaged if people aren't careful. So I know most people that are into fishing, like really into fishing, and they're trying to learn more by, reading books, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos. They're people that want to respect this sport, the resource. So those are great tips. And a lot of times, like you said, it's just people don't know. Maybe they watch Bassmaster and they're holding the bass out in front of the cameras for like 5 straight minutes. It's like, that's not how it goes. Fish don't breathe air. So yeah, it's great tips. And again, a lot of people, they just don't know. So
And
it's good
even
to
another
have
thing
some
too
reminders.
is like you're mentioning with, putting some thought into the body of water you're fishing, because our zones that we have here in Ontario, we have 20 fishing zones in all of Ontario, which is a huge province. And you look at something on, let's say, zone 17, which includes the Kawartha Lakes and whatnot. On a Kawartha Lake, you might be able to keep those 2 bass. So like you said, you go to a small stream or you go to a small pond, and if people are going and fishing out regularly and keeping their limit every day, that cannot support what that zone allows. And there's too many bodies of water in Ontario to police them individually, or to create laws for them individually and do all the testing on each single body of water to see population, to see how actively fished they are. Like, it's too much to be able to feasibly do. So it relies upon us, put some thought into it. If you're fishing a smaller body of water, you're fishing a river that, these on either end, it might be either landlocked or locked in that river. They're never going to leave that river their entire lives. That's a small enclosed pond, essentially, that you're fishing. Think of it like that. There may be the odd bass coming down from river up above or from below, but usually it's its own closed system, and that could easily, like you mentioned, be very easily disturbed by possession limits, even though it is within limits.
And that's, I mean, you've got some areas in a river which, may only be a few hundred square meters. And you'll have generations of fish that will inhabit that, for forever. And, the carrying capacity of that does not equal the carrying capacity of Lake Erie or Lake Ontario, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they just don't equate. So it's just a matter of, use common sense and, respect the population of bass that you found. And something else that, I mean, I take, I try to educate people as much as I can, but I don't believe in honey holes, right? I used air quotes for the listeners there. I don't believe in honey holes. Smallmouth bass, I mean, nobody's accused them of being, overly intelligent. But they do learn, right? So, we've all heard of spot burners, and people go out to the same spot day after day. I've been guilty of it, as a younger adult as well. But I will find a spot if I know that spot produces. I might come back one other time later in the season to see how that spot behaves under different circumstances or different conditions. But otherwise, I won't come back to that spot for another year. I have that opportunity because I'm surrounded by rivers. I don't, not everybody has the opportunity to, they can just go out to their local bridge and fish the same spot day after day. I get that. That's fine. I'm fortunate enough to be able to move around, so I do move around. And for me, it's the game of trying to find the bigger fish, right? But I try as best I can to sort of respect, each, honey hole, for what it is, and I try not to burn that out. And when it's at all possible, I try to encourage others to do the same. Obviously, when you're just starting out and trying to explore and trying to learn, you're never going to learn if you're going to a different spot every single day, right? I mean, obviously, to understand that first spot, unlock that, get that under your belt. But once you reach that level, I think it's worthwhile continuing to move on as often as you can.
Definitely. Good tips for sure. And I don't want to rush this along. Again, this podcast could be like 3 hours long for sure, but I thought we could just get into our Q&A. We put on our Instagram. Make sure you follow us on Instagram. Make sure you follow Adam on Instagram as well. Again, I'm going to link down in the show notes all of Adam's information. So if you want to check out anything, social media, his book, anything like that, it's going to be down in the show notes. So here are some questions that we got from Instagram. And I thought since we're going a little overtime right now, I'll just give you the question and then you can answer in 1 or 2 sentences.
Yep.
Now, me and Andrew cannot do that. We are the worst at that. But
let me explain why that is.
Yeah, let me explain for 4 hours. So I got a question here from Thomas at River Smalleys, Ontario. What are your top 3 Ontario rivers?
He knows what the top 3 are.
He knows, I know.
Yeah, so I would say I'd probably definitely put Nith River at number 1. I'd probably put Maitland at number 2. Number 3 is going to be tough. It'd be different than his, but I'll have to say Grand River. But Saugeen would be a close 4th.
I'm writing all these down for when I go fishing next month. Here's another question from Thomas. I normally don't read 2 from the same person, but this is a good question. So he said, do you think that Ontario's fishing regulations need to be updated to be more management based?
Absolutely. I think the zone system is antiquated. And I think the guiding principles behind each zone is antiquated as well. You guys had Brad Scott on, a number of episodes ago, and he called it out exactly. There are some zones that are actually intended to decrease certain populations of game fish in favor of, the other more prized fish in the area. So I agree.
Again, you could probably talk for an hour about that in particular. That's the problem with podcasts. It's like sometimes I look at people's podcasts and they're like, the episodes are like 3 hours long. I'm like, I can't listen to that, but I get why.
Now, Jesse, it's a first 4-part episode featuring Adam Merrifield.
And then the other 8 episodes where Adam just reads live his book. And Andrew pretends to do sign language beside him. All right, here's a good question from Jeremy. And Jeremy asked this question. He says, what are your top 3 smallmouth bass baits and how to retrieve them?
Top 3.
Now, you only get 2 sentences, so I'll give you 3.
Okay. I would say top is some form of... Yes, it would be a popper. Yeah. I absolutely love a popper, and
noise they make.
Yeah. I love a popper, and it's depending on the season, it's a cadence of pop, and pause. It's just automatic now. Number 2 would definitely be a jig, so a skirted jig, with a jig and pig, craw trailer on there. And that, I just love dragging it across the bottom. I just love bouncing it off rocks. And then I'd say, number 3 is going to be a tie. I'd say in the spring, it'd be a spinnerbait. In the summer, it'd be a crankbait. Can I do that? Am I allowed? Yeah.
Well, we'll allow it this time.
Yeah.
Next time, not next time.
You're on thin ice.
Yeah. Warning.
You can't
That's
fish
first
for
warning.
bass through the ice.
All right, we're going to do one more question, and this one is from a guy named Andrew. He says, do you think that average Ontario anglers should write a book, or would that be considered an act of literacy warfare? I'll save you the thing. Andrew does not know how to write, so we're good.
Yeah, it was. I was going to make a joke somewhat like that, but I didn't want to insult anybody.
Oh, you can totally insult Andrew. I'm totally fine with that. And I won't edit it out.
Why do you think this podcast is an audio format and not like written?
Yeah. That's right.
We don't have a blog. We have a vlog.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for all the information today, Adam. I thought before we ended, we could talk a little bit about Adam's giveaway, and I'll let Adam handle that.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together what I consider to be a complete smallmouth fishing package. So we'll put in a signed copy of the book. We'll throw in some rock knocker jigs. I might even put together a couple of river rippers, which is just a blade thrown on those rock knocker jigs, so it's a chatterbait. And then I'm going to throw in a Berkeley bullet pop. I'm going to throw in a Rebel craw.
Ooh.
Right, and then and then from there, like I might throw in like
all time.
Yeah. So, but pretty much, just build out sort of my bare essentials for what I put in, and we'll give that away.
That's awesome. And Andrew, how can you win this?
You have to, if you are a Patreon member, you are automatically entered. So if you are already donating a couple bucks of your precious money to our precious fund, so that we don't have to pay for everything out of our own pocket to get this podcast to you, then you don't have to do anything. If you aren't doing that already, you can click on the link below for our Patreon. And just for $2 a month, you are automatically entered into any and all giveaways that we have.
Awesome. So again, we'd like to thank Adam. We are really happy that you actually got on the podcast with us. We know you would. It's just getting our schedules, and during fishing season, it's literally the worst. It's like, oh, you're free? No, I'm free. But it's always good. Again, are you planning on going to CanCast next year? You're going to be there again? So
up for grabs. I'm not 100% sure yet. I am sort of working with Great Canadian Fishing Store. They're going to have a presence there, so I'm trying to make a decision as to whether I kind of show up with them or whether I get my own booth. I haven't really figured that out. So
Okay.
gotta
So
sit
either
down
way,
and
you'll
make some
probably be there
decisions.
though
I'll be
in the
there.
flesh. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be
Awesome.
in
So
attendance for sure.
we're huge fans of the CanCast Fishing Show, and again, it's going to be in April
Yeah.
of 2025. It is the show that you cannot miss, and Adam will be there. You can definitely talk to him there for sure,
Yeah.
or you can hit him up on social media too. I'm sure he's a nice guy, and he'll actually message you back, unlike Jesse. I get lazy sometimes, but it's okay. So we'd like to thank Adam again for joining us on the podcast and giving us all this knowledge, not just for you guys. We don't invite guests on this podcast for you guys. We do it for ourselves, and you guys just benefit from the extra stuff that we don't have. So we'd like to thank you for
suddenly,
that.
Jesse and Andrew are suddenly creeping around Nith River now.
Yeah, I don't even know where that is, but I'm going to look it up right now. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
So anyway, we always end every single episode with the quote of the week, and to handle that is Adam.
So I'm going to pull this one from Randy Long. So Randy Long brought this up in a conversation, which I thought summed it up perfectly. So 100% of the smallmouth are in 1% of the river at any given time.
That sounds so intimidating. Thanks, Adam.